So welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm reacting to a lot of the hot takes that people have sent me. So let's get straight into the hot takes. We need to showcase more models than Bella Hadid. It's getting repetitive. Now, I think this is a very lukewarm take. I think that a lot of people would agree that Bella Hadid is sort of everywhere. She's in so many runway shows and so many campaigns. But I try to refrain from criticizing Bella Hadid on a personal level because Bella, first of all, is actually very nice-hearted and kind-hearted, and a lot of kids that benefit from nepotism, because obviously Bella is the child of a very famous model. A lot of them are very stuck up, and they're just a bit spoilt in the way that they behave. They're a bit badly behaved. I wouldn't describe Bella that way, but what I don't like about the fashion industry these days is everything is way too commercial. And because Bella Hadid is famous, Bella Hadid has really good engagement on social media, it's very easy. And a lot of brands know that they'll get a good return in investment by having Bella walk in their runway shows or be in their campaigns. So I get it from a commercial standpoint, but it'd also be good for brands to invest in new models and for us to see new faces. That's why I really like what Prada has been doing. Mucha Prada and Raf Simons and a lot of their recent shows, they've been using models that haven't been casted for runway shows before, and they're casting models as like their first opportunity walking on a Prada show. I love that and what they're doing with that, because then it brings new faces to the fore, and these new faces are people that might have the potential to go on and be big and be the models in the campaigns and models being regularly seen in runway shows. So once the founder leaves their brand, the brand should cease operations. Now, this is actually really interesting. This is a take that I've heard a lot of people say, like, oh, when brands, I wish like brands end with the designer. And I get where it comes from. I would say this is it's a hot take, but it's a hot take I hear a lot. And I agree and disagree, and I'll explain what I mean. So when you think of brands, let's think of Dior, for example. At Dior, there have been designers like John Galliano and Yves Saint Laurent. And in my opinion, John Galliano and Yves Saint Laurent, they have genuinely added more to the Christian Dior world, and they've progressed the brand, in my opinion. And so I think that we wouldn't get, things like the saddlebag without a John Galliano. There's certain things we wouldn't get without Yves Saint Laurent. And therefore, I think that sometimes is actually a good thing that a lot of designers have been at a house after the founder has died, because they have really genuinely progressed the brand. But then, of course, there is the case that for a lot of other brands, which I won't mention, the creative directors aren't great. They just keep copying stuff from the past. They say they're referencing or paying homage, but really they're just copying things, let's be honest. And so they don't really add anything new to the table. And so they're just like creating clothes for creating clothes' sake, or just for commercial reasons to try and keep this house afloat. And so in those cases, I don't really agree with it. I think for me, a really important factor to bring in when you're talking about this topic is the intention of the brand and the designer at the brand. Because when you think of why people actually create these brands, let's say couturiers from last century, they were actually really passionate about clothes. Most of these people, when you read books about them, they were making clothes when they were younger. They were, making clothes for dolls. They used to dream about fashion and all this stuff, and they worked under couturiers, and they went to fashion school, or they were just apprentices under a really good designer. And so you can tell that they're really, really passionate about the craft. And by the time they start their own house, the reason why they start it is because they genuinely feel like they had something new to bring to the table in terms of fashion and in terms of design. And so their intentions were really, really pure from the start. They really just wanted to make very good clothes, high quality clothes. They wanted to make the best clothes that they saw that they could make. Whereas now, especially, and once again, like I said, it's a bit nuanced. It depends on what brand, but there are many designers and there are many brands that the intention is just to make money and nothing else. The couturiers from last century, a lot of them, they did want to make money. Like Chanel definitely wanted to make money, for example, but it was a mixture of wanting to make money but also wanting to promote Parisian fashion as superior. And so they had this air of like, our designs are the best. We're going to make sure our designs are the best. We're going to make sure our quality is the best. And I don't think that fashion now and designers now have that same, that same willingness or that same pride in French fashion or fashion from wherever they're from. And therefore, yeah, they just mess up a lot of those big fashion houses. So it's like, is this house still going on because it's owned by LVMH or Kering and they really just want to turn it into a $1 billion brand and just turn it into a money making machine? Or is this brand being continued because they have like a protege, like Sarah Burton at McQueen, for example? She wants to continue Alexander McQueen's legacy. She worked under McQueen, so she understands McQueen. Like, it's so it just really depends. But this was a good take for me to talk about because it is something that I see all the time where people are like, once the founder dies, the brand should die and people shouldn't take over. This next hot take is Cristobal Balenciaga would hate the brand's current creative direction. Now, this is another hot take I've heard, and it's not just about Balenciaga, it's about any brand. They say like, oh, if Alexander McQueen was alive, he would hate what Sarah Burton is doing with... They'll say things like, if Alexander McQueen is alive right now, he would hate how the brand is. If this person was alive right now, if Schiaparelli was alive right now. People say this all the time. And I think it just depends on what perspective you have on it. So, for example, I wouldn't say I really like Demna's philosophy, but I think he has really interesting ideas. And therefore, I think that when it comes to Demna, while I agree that Cristobal Balenciaga, if he was alive, if I was to guess, obviously this is just like serious speculation, but if I was to speculate, I don't think he would like where Balenciaga has gone at all. Like Cristobal Balenciaga, if you read about him, this is someone that learned how to, make suits at a tailoring establishment. This is someone who was breaking down patterns of Chanel's clothing just to understand the construction and study the construction of her work. This is a purist, a fashion purist to the core. Cristobal Balenciaga is like a fashion technician. That kind of person would not want to make t-shirts with his name printed on it and the quality isn't even that great. I don't think that Cristobal Balenciaga would like that. I just don't think he would agree with that at all. That's what they're doing with his house. I just don't think he would see it the same way. That being said, I don't think that just because, let's say, Cristobal Balenciaga wouldn't like the direction the house has gone in, that I inherently don't like Demna's design. Because I feel like sometimes when this sort of take is brought up, it's brought up as a slight to the current creative director and the current team and what they're doing now. However, in the case of Balenciaga, it's a bit nuanced because Balenciaga right now is under a huge controversy. It's a whole mess. And that adds an even extra layer. Like, of course, Cristobal Balenciaga would not want to be associated with all the stuff that Balenciaga is associated with now. So there's many different layers to it. But I feel like the two can be separate. When this take is brought up, I feel like it's, like I said earlier, in slight of the current creative director. I think that you can recognize that the founder of the brand wouldn't like the direction that the brand is going without also thinking that being said, the designer of the brand is bad, or the designs are inherently bad, for example. But yeah, Cristobal Balenciaga is just a purist. Just reading about him and his work, he doesn't strike me as the type of person that would just give away all his integrity just to make money, or like destroy the brand's direction just to make more money. Like, once again, with like the t-shirts with just Balenciaga printed all over it. And you get this, like, if you think of all the fashion purists, if you think of people like Martin Margiela, once Martin Margiela was tired of the fashion industry and didn't like where it was going, he quit. If he wanted to make more money, Martin Margiela could have made loads more money if he continued designing. Same thing with people like Annabelle Meister. Andy, she could have just kept designing and making more money, but it's not about that. It's about the art and the craft. And if they think that they've said everything they want to say, they've created everything that they set out to create and things like that, the people that are, fashion purists, they tend to just let go of their brand or do things that are literally go against making money. And so I just feel like that, era of purists, they just would not like where any of the brands, any of the big houses have gone these days, to be honest. Now, this take is we need a reset, a new template of sorts. The old ways of the industry aren't working. Now, I would agree. I think that there's so many issues that the fashion industry needs to fix. Oh my word, whether it comes down to sustainability, the carbon footprint of fashion, the fact that a lot of big companies and big magazines promote trends, but it's not because they want you to wear new things or they think it's interesting. They're just trying to make people buy more stuff and sell more clothing. The cycle of fashion, it just promotes overconsumption. There's a really big issue with that. And then also I feel like there are way too many runway shows, which means that designers don't even have a lot of time to develop layered ideas. And sometimes you look at a lot of these runway shows and they seem a bit rushed. That's why, and I try to reiterate this, that when Fashion Week happens, because Fashion Week is upon us, it's coming really soon, try to focus also not just on the massive brands, but also the up and coming designers, because a lot of time their ideas seem a lot more developed than the big houses. The only thing about the big houses is they have the means and they have money, so they can create, more interesting things in terms of like developing fabrics and using technology. But in terms of ideas, I do find that I'm more inspired by a lot of what the smaller brands do. And that comes down to the fashion system, the fact that we went from having spring, summer, and fall winter collections to having spring, summer, fall winter, cruise, pre fall, pre spring. It's too much. It's too much. It's too much. It's just way too much. And the issue is not just overproduction, it's just the fact that these days it seems like people don't really expect high quality garments. And therefore, brands churn out clothes that are really terrible quality and then they just fade and break and rip easily. And therefore, these things end up in landfills. If people are actively making high quality clothes all the time, then there's a less of a likelihood that these things would end up in landfills or people would get rid of it. So yeah, so many issues. I definitely agree that fashion needs a reset. So I wouldn't really say it's a hot take. I know some people like fashion the way it is, but honestly, it needs a serious reset. Now, the last take I'm going to feature, save the best for last, is the democratization of fashion made the industry worse in every aspect, from design to environmental. Now, this is a really hot take. I like this take. I like this take. Now, I think that this is a very deep, deep, deep hot take. And how I'm going to address it is looking at it in terms of, okay, with how fashion is right now and how it's been democratized, what are the positives and the negatives that came out of that, essentially? So to start with the positives, I think that now the everyday person is involved in fashion, especially high fashion, where that wasn't the case before. Before, the gatekeepers were the fashion magazines and the brands, and you had to buy the magazine to even remotely learn anything about what was going on behind the scenes or the runway shows. And people had to buy like catalogs just to see the pictures of the runway shows. It wasn't like readily available like people like WGSN or Vogue Runway, where we can look at these runway pictures now. I think sometimes we do take it for granted. That just wasn't the case, and so the information was just really hard to get. Whereas now, I think, especially because of social media, I think social media was one of the biggest things that democratized fashion. I think now that everyone is involved in the conversation and more people have access to, you know, fashion, and I think it's such a good thing because now you get more perspectives in fashion. I think sometimes if you're too in a bubble, you might lose sight of certain things. So before in fashion, it was just high society people and people that managed to fit into the high society of fashion that got to be involved in fashion, especially in the capacity of like runway shows and big fashion houses. Whereas now that just isn't the case. Just think of platforms like Discord or even YouTube. I love fashion YouTube because fashion YouTube is one of the very few places where, like in the comment section, people actually have genuine conversations. When you go to a fashion magazine's online page and you read an article, there's no like comment section on a lot of these websites. Some websites there are, but not all of them. So there isn't even feedback. They don't even get any feedback. Or if something is wrong, they're not really accountable because there aren't people in the comment section just like attacking them like, you got that wrong, you got that wrong. Whereas YouTube is a bit more open, people have more open conversations. And also fashion has become a viable career. So someone like me, for example, making YouTube videos and becoming a fashion journalist, that definitely wasn't possible before, social media democratized fashion. So a lot of new careers and new opportunities have been opened by fashion being democratized. Like, it's actually insane. Like, fashion brands literally live stream their runway shows on Instagram and YouTube. Whereas if we're talking about last century, a lot of the runway shows, especially at the biggest houses, were literally just private viewings for their clients and very important fashion press. So people that, were editors at Harper's Bazaar and Vogue, those kind of people. That being said, I wouldn't say that, because I know that, and this is why, this is going into why this is a really hot take. I think a lot of people just think that everything is positive about fashion being democratized, whereas I can see that there are a lot of positives, but there are also a lot of negatives. So to talk about some of the negatives, for example, I feel like a lot of people that are authorities in fashion are very uneducated about fashion. And I mean that in the most respectful way. Not saying that I'm the most educated person. That being said, like, you see on runway shows, for example, influencers are invited to runway shows and they're not even looking at the runway show. They're not looking at the clothes. They're literally looking down on their phone. It's like things like that. Or the fact that a lot of influencers, they talk about brands that they're not really well read on. And so it just seems generally that the people that have the biggest voices on fashion are actually the least educated, whereas before fashion was democratized, it was really just kind of like the gatekeepers, like, the people that were writing for Harper's Bazaar and Vogue and, all these different, The Face was such a good magazine, oh my God. ID, these were the people that were the serious authorities on fashion, and these were people that were so well read and so educated. So when you read about fashion in these magazines, you really felt like you were getting a very nuanced opinion about fashion. Whereas now, people go, that runway show was trash, it was garbage, and everyone's like, yeah, it was garbage, and it's like no one has really added anything to the conversation or said anything that you can learn from. And so that's definitely an issue with fashion being more democratized. It means that it's a bit, because becoming a voice in fashion is less so about how much you know or how good you are at telling a story. It's more about if you're liked or not, if you're likable, if you can get popular because you're a polarizing figure rather than, focusing on the facts. It even comes down to the rationale of why celebrities, for example, want to be in fashion. I've had so many celebrities say that the only reason why they care about fashion, or the reason why they got into fashion or involved themselves in the fashion industry in any way, is for money. So really, what they want to do, a lot of like musicians, for example, or actors or actresses, they see the fashion industry as, if I become a name within the fashion industry, then I can get a campaign with Calvin Klein and make money. I can do the campaign for Dior and make money. So it's not really because they like fashion or they love fashion. It's really just a money making scheme. Whereas I think before, when we think of, designers like Givenchy and the actors and the actresses that he used to work with, the actresses then, the Hollywood actresses, there was this collaboration between the designer and the actresses in terms of what they would wear to the red carpets. And it was like a collaboration, and you could tell that these actresses loved fashion. They loved the designer they were working with. They knew everything about the clothes. They're really educated. And now it does seem that that is less so the case, and it is quite annoying. Like, sometimes, for example, I will watch the Met Gala, and the presenters at the Met Gala, no shade, the presenters at the Met Gala do not even care about the clothes. They're just talking about very frivolous, in my opinion, pointless things, when the Met Gala is literally one of the biggest fashion events of the year, and you should really be focusing on the clothes and the garments and the designers that made it and how long it took to make, and facts about the clothes and interesting nuggets about the clothes. Instead, it's too, now fashion is a bit too over glamorized. It's too talking about the celebrities but not about the clothes. It's too I'm gonna wear a Balenciaga print t-shirt to show everyone that I have money rather than I'm going to wear this t-shirt because I actually just like the design. And I also think as a byproduct to a lot of authorities in fashion not being well educated on fashion these days, it seems that as a byproduct of that, people care less about quality of clothes because a lot of people I've seen spend so much money on clothes that is so bad in quality. I'm like, why would anyone spend all this money on a garment that is that badly made? The construction is awful, and you're still spending £1,000 just because it's a brand name. That is not the kind of thing. I feel like last century. I don't know why I keep saying I feel like. I know this for a fact because I've read about it in so many different books and I've spoken to people that are way older that experienced fashion back then. The case is that people had higher expectations from luxury brands. They expected high quality garments. They knew what quality was. They knew about fabrics. So they wouldn't expect any less. If you watch documentaries, I've reacted to a documentary where Gianni Versace was, using real silk in the garments and talking about how he really cares about the craft and the quality. Compare that to the quality of Versace silk now, night and day. So it's just the expectation of customers, and it just seems like fashion is it's almost like a rip-off. It's why it's really hard for me to engage in fashion in terms of like buying really expensive stuff. I don't really buy a lot of clothes unless it's like Under Mister, to be honest, or maybe Rick Owens or Yoji. But apart from that, I just don't have any motivation or desire to buy extremely overpriced clothing that won't even last long because it's made horribly, and I know it's made horribly because I know how to sew and I've been a pattern maker and I've made garments myself, so I know what is a fair price, and I also know when a garment is just made really badly. Brands literally get away with murder these days, and I think that kind of in a way is due to the democratization of fashion, because when you open up the conversation of fashion from people who really care about it and are well studied on it to people that maybe just care about the entertainment side of it, if people tell you that, oh, this Balenciaga coat is really high quality, even though they don't really know what high quality actually means, then you're going to buy it because your favorite celebrity or influencer told you it's high quality. And because you don't know the difference, you don't know any better, you don't really have anything to compare it to. Like, to illustrate how bad people don't have a knowledge on fashion, and once again, I'm not trying to come across like I know everything, but it tends to be the case that when I speak to people that work at brands, I know more about the brand than the people that work there. So let's say a luxury fashion brand. I'm not saying that this happened to Chanel. Actually, it hasn't happened at Chanel because I don't know anyone that works for Chanel, but I'm using it as an example, not to like talk about brands that this has actually happened. I'm not trying to get blacklisted. But let's just pretend that I've been in many situations where, let's pretend in this case it's the Chanel staff, where people will literally be heads of marketing for Chanel, heads of, you know, menswear for Chanel, and I will tell them about the history of the brand and different nuggets about the history of the brand that they didn't even know. And I'm like, how the hell are you in this position at this brand? You have access to the archive. I don't even have access to this archive. I've just read about it in loads of books and interviewed loads of people about it that have worked for the brand over the years. So how the hell do I know about that more than you? But it's once again because it's about the intention of what fashion is today. It's about the glamour. It's about being famous on social media. It's about, aligning yourself with celebrities. It's not about really, really honing your skills and, spending years and years and years working on your craft and trying to be the best designer that you could possibly be. And then that mentality just spreads out into every facet of the brand, which is why you have people in the marketing department don't even know the history of the brand. And these are the people that are supposed to be doing, the marketing campaigns or running, setting the mood or the tone of how a brand is going to communicate to the outside world or to its audience. It's all a bit strange. So while I can realize that, for example, the reason I have a career is because of social media and because fashion has been democratized, there are also a lot of negatives that I hope, you know, is fixed with time. I hope that people expect more from brands. I hope that people stop buying shitty Balenciaga pieces that are made terribly and are overpriced. Or I hope that people start to realize that, you know, brands that are moving their production from places that make high quality garments to places that, you know, make garments that are less quality but then charge you more. Stop buying it. Stop buying it, because it's customers that cause it. When you buy these terribly made clothes, like Prada loafers that are made horribly, and they're literally glued together. They're not even welded or like stitched together. They literally detach by glue. Then they're like, well, customers are going to buy our glue attached loafers, so why don't we just keep selling these and people are still going to buy it either way. Don't support trashy fashion and low quality fashion and overpriced fashion. And that's probably the part that, you know, fashion being democratized, I don't like, in terms of people expecting less and not understanding what high quality is, and therefore just going with the flow and just letting these brands get away with anything. So yeah, I kind of went on a rant there. That's quite hilarious, but amazing take. Thank you so much to everyone that handed in hot takes. If you want me to react to your hot take in the future, then just DM me your hot take. Normally when people DM me hot takes over time, or I might ask on my story, I just screenshot them, and then when I make a video, I just pick which ones I like or which ones are varied in a way. But let me know your fashion hot takes in the comments below, or your thoughts on any of the hot takes that I've addressed, and I'll be back with another video very soon.